Yeah, I'd appreciate it if everybody who has phones, cell phones, would turn them off. Okay, the first stage is what I call the traditional stage of culture. And maybe the characteristic feature of a traditional society is the organization, a hierarchical mode of social organization. So society is organized into a certain number of fixed social classes, and one's own position within this social hierarchy is usually determined by birth. Of course, in certain cases, individuals can rise up from their status assigned to them by birth, but this seems to be a very dominant pattern in traditional societies. So one's social position is determined by birth, and each social class will have certain prescribed duties. So an individual in one class will have different duties from an individual in another class. And within a traditional society, the individual will be locked into a complex web of relationships which are culturally and socially determined. He'll be the member of a family, generally an extended family. There will be duties incumbent on him by reason of his position within the family. He'll belong to the village, maybe to a guild, to a larger community, and the individual will be integrated very closely within that community. In the traditional society, ethics will be governed by the conception of virtue. And virtue in a traditional society is what gives strength to the individual and which promotes the cohesion of the society as a whole. The special virtues in a traditional culture would be honor, the sense of personal dignity, courage, rectitude or righteousness, respect for authority, loyalty to those with whom one has relations, service to others, and reverence for tradition, and a commitment to uphold the tradition that one has inherited. Okay, now as we enter what we call the modern era, beginning in Europe, maybe 16th, 17th century, this framework of a traditional culture starts to become unraveled. Perhaps the distinctive feature of the modern stage of culture is the intensified sense of individuality. So with the birth of the modern era, the individual comes to recognize himself or herself as a distinct individual who has the capacity through their personal will to reshape and change the world. And so the arising of the modern era brings this great sense of personal power and capacity. It begins perhaps with critical thought, the ability to criticize tradition, to find the flaws in tradition, and then to envisage new possibilities, and through the affirmation of the will, through the application of the will, one sets out to transform one's society and the world. So on the one hand, modern culture brings a sense of strength and capacity to the individual, but it has another effect. That is, it disconnects the individual from the wider network of relations in which the person had been embedded in a traditional culture. And once, afraid this is sounding a little bit like an academic university lecture, but let me just go on. Okay, but once the individual gets torn out from that web of family and community relationships, along with the increased sense of power and capacity, comes an increasing sense of loneliness, alienation, and isolation. There also comes, again, this is through the development of modern science, a reduction of the world to, call it, the lowest common denominator, that reality consists of just impersonal, cold particles of matter reeling through space in accordance with the laws of Newtonian physics, combining into different combinations, and everything else is just a superstructure built upon this foundation of brute, senseless, unintelligent matter. And so this brings a collapse, at least among certain very sensitive thinkers, the collapse of all of those structures that gave a sense of transcendent meaning and value to life. Life becomes seen as empty, meaningless, just a field of competition between individuals with no higher purpose. And so to avoid the despair that that sense of meaningless might entail, there comes the distractions in the form of obsession with power, money, influence, sexual enjoyment. And the development of more powerful, constant innovation. Within each generation, again, almost every year, there has to be new models, new machines, new technologies to replace those of a few years ago, which have now become obsolete. So this constant obsession with progress and development. Okay, now there are certain virtues which are characteristic of the modern era, the modern mind. The virtues that are emphasized are, let us say, independence, both independence of will, independence of thought. Nobody's going to tell me what to think. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. I'm going to, whatever I want to do, that I'm going to do. Whatever I want to think, that I'm going to think. So independence, diligence, the eagerness to work hard in order to transform